Elvani could no longer feel her limbs. She lay curled around her child, her broken body shielding him as her blood seeped into the cracked, crimson soil. The deep gashes on her arms and legs pulsed with agony, torn open by the jagged claws and snapping jaws of the beasts that had hunted them through the wastelands. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the sharp sting of the air burning her lungs. She could taste copper on her tongue, thick and metallic. She was dying. The thought came not with fear, but with resignation. It was inevitable. This world had never been kind to her, only cruel and relentless, and now it was taking the last thing she had left, her life. But she had no regrets. She had fought for him. Beneath her, the child trembled, his small frame pressed tightly against her chest. His skin, the same deep violet as hers, was streaked with dust, his golden eyes wide with silent terror. He made no sound. He had learned long ago that noise meant death. He had grown up in the shadows of monsters, just as she had. She forced her lips to move, to whisper a single word in their native tongue. Survive. The creatures prowled around them, their elongated forms shifting in the darkness. Their fur was matted with filth, their teeth jagged and too large for their malformed mouths. The largest of them, a hulking skeletal beast with milky, sightless eyes, let out a guttural snarl. It had been waiting for this moment, for her strength to finally fail. The others shifted, restless with hunger, muscles tensing in anticipation. Elvani closed her eyes. At least it would be quick. Then, a sound split the air, a sharp, deafening crack, followed by a blinding flash of light. The scent of scorched flesh filled the night as one of the creatures let out a shriek and collapsed, its body convulsing in the dirt. Another shot. Another. The pack erupted in chaos, howling as fire and steel tore through them with brutal precision. Their bodies jerked violently as something unseen tore through their flesh, bursting veins, shattering bone. Elvani forced her eyes open. A figure strode through the carnage. Tall, armed, human. His weapon, some kind of projectile rifle, spat fire with every squeeze of the trigger, his movements calculated, efficient, lethal. One of the remaining beasts lunged at him, snarling, but he didn't flinch. He turned, blade flashing in the dim light, and drove it deep into the creature's throat. Blood sprayed across his dark, worn armor as the thing collapsed at his feet. In moments, it was over. Silence settled over the land, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the ragged sound of Elvani's breath. The man stood still for a moment, his stance tense, his weapon still raised as he scanned the surroundings. Then, slowly, he lowered it. His gaze found her. Elvani wanted to move, to push herself upright, to bare her teeth in defiance, but her body refused to obey. She could only watch as the human approached. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a dust-streaked hood, but she could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the hardened lines of a man who had lived through war. His eyes, a deep and piercing green, burned with something unreadable. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the faint scars crisscrossing his hands, the worn edges of his gear. He smelled of metal and dust and something unfamiliar. She tensed as he reached out, but he didn't touch her. Instead, his eyes flickered downward to the small, trembling form pressed against her chest. Her son. Elvani bared her teeth weakly, a low hiss rattling from her throat. She had spent too many years alone, learning that trust was a weakness, that kindness was a lie. No one had ever stayed. No one had ever helped. The human didn't flinch. He didn't try to pry the child from her grasp or speak in his strange, guttural tongue. He only extended a hand. The boy hesitated. Then, slowly, his tiny violet fingers curled around the human's rough, callous ones. Elvani felt something inside her crack. Something old, something she had buried deep beneath years of pain. The man exhaled through his nose, as if satisfied, then turned his attention back to her. His brow furrowed slightly as he reached for her, pressing 2 fingers against her throat, checking her pulse. His touch was firm, warm, steady. She didn't know why, but that steadiness unsettled her more than anything. His hands ghosted over her wounds, inspecting them, before he exhaled and muttered something under his breath. She didn't recognize the words, but his tone was unmistakable. Frustration. He was annoyed that she was this badly injured. The thought was absurd. She had lived her entire life being treated as less. By her own people, by the outcasts she had once called kin, by the world itself. No one had ever cared if she lived or died. And yet, here was a human, staring at her wounds as if they were somehow unacceptable. She tried to push him away, but the moment she shifted, pain lanced through her body. The world tilted violently. Her vision blurred. Strong arms caught her before she could hit the ground. She let out a weak snarl, but the man didn't release her. He simply adjusted his grip, shifting her weight against him as if she weighed nothing. Her head slumped against his shoulder, her exhausted body betraying her pride. She felt his warmth seep into her frozen limbs. A strange sensation curled in her chest, something unfamiliar. Safety. Her mind screamed at her to fight it, to reject it, but her body was too far gone. As the human lifted her into his arms, her son still clinging to his sleeve, Alvani had one final thought before the darkness swallowed her. He's not leaving. For the first time in years, she was not alone. Alvani awoke to warmth. It was disorienting. For years, her sleep had been restless, spent curled around her son in the cold embrace of the wasteland, always listening for the sounds of approaching predators. The nights had been long, her body stiff with exhaustion, her mind never truly at rest. Even in the rare moments when sleep claimed her, it had been shallow and dreamless. But now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was warm. Her eyelids were heavy, her body sinking into something softer than she remembered. Fabric? Not the rough, threadbare rag she had scavenged over the years, but something thicker, woven. It smelled of smoke, metal, and something else human. Her pulse spiked. Memory crashed over her like a tidal wave. The attack. The beasts. The human. Her eyes snapped open. She was inside a shelter. The walls were metal, reinforced with scavenged plating. A dim, flickering light hung from the ceiling, casting shadows that stretched and curled like restless ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of cooked meat, something rich and unfamiliar, its aroma mingling with the lingering scent of blood. Hers. Pain surged through her limbs the moment she tried to move. She sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers instinctively gripping the blanket draped over her body. Her wounds throbbed, deep and raw, but they were no longer bleeding. Someone had cleaned them. She didn't have to wonder who. A quiet shuffle caught her attention. She turned her head, wincing as her stiff muscles protested the movement. Her son was nearby, curled up against the shelter wall, his small body half buried in a pile of blankets. His breathing was slow, and even he was sleeping. Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed back onto the cot. He was alive. He was warm. He was safe. And then she saw him, the human. He sat near the fire, his back turned slightly as he tended to a makeshift cooking station. His armor was stripped down to its base layers, his rifle within easy reach. The firelight flickered against the hard lines of his face, casting shadows beneath his eyes. Alvani had spent years fearing humans, hating them. The last time she had seen one, it had been a slaver's enforcer, tearing families apart with callous ease. Her people had always whispered of them as invaders, scavengers, conquerors. They were a species that took what they wanted and left ruin behind. And yet, this one had stayed. He had saved her, fed her child, kept watch while she slept. Her throat tightened, conflicting emotions warring in her chest. Gratitude felt foreign, dangerous. She had survived this long by trusting no one. The human must have sensed her stare because he turned slightly, meeting her gaze. His eyes flicked over her, assessing, calculating. Not in the way a predator did, but as if he were checking on her. She bristled at the thought. "You're awake." His voice was low, rough, not unkind. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the fire that licked at her wounds. "Where are we?" Her voice was hoarse, her native tongue thick with exhaustion. The human leaned back against the wall, stretching one leg out. Shelter. A temporary one. Not much, but it keeps the storms out. He gestured toward the metal walls as if that explained everything. You needed rest. Elvani glanced down at herself. Her wounds had been wrapped in clean strips of fabric, human fabric. He had used his own supplies on her. She curled her fingers against the blanket, suppressing the instinctive urge to snarl. She hated being in debt. I didn't ask for your help, she muttered. The human raised an eyebrow. You were dying. Her jaw tightened. She knew that. She knew she had been too weak to fight. But hearing him say it out loud made her feel small. Helpless. She hated that feeling. Still, she had survived. That was what mattered. Her son shifted in his sleep, letting out a quiet sigh. The tension in her chest eased slightly at the sound. The human must have noticed because he nodded toward the boy. He's tough. Barely made a sound while I patched him up. Elvani turned sharply. He was injured? Nothing serious. The human held up his hands, as if to calm her. Just a few scrapes. No broken bones. Elvani exhaled, her grip on the blanket loosening slightly. There was a long silence. The fire crackled, filling the space between them. Finally, the human leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. What's his name? She hesitated. Giving someone a name was dangerous. Names were ties, and ties could be broken. Still, he had saved them. Elian, she said quietly. The human nodded, as if memorizing it. And you? Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken her own name in years. No one had cared enough to ask. Elvani. There was no recognition in his eyes. No sign that the name meant anything to him. That was good. He simply nodded again. Garrett Creed. She eyed him warily. That's your name. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's what people call me. She wasn't sure what to make of that answer, so she let it go. Silence stretched between them again. The fire crackled. The wind howled faintly outside, rattling the edges of the shelter. Elvani wasn't sure what she was supposed to say. She wasn't used to conversation. The human, Garrick, stood and grabbed a small metal plate from beside the fire. He walked toward her and set it down within reach. Food. The scent hit her first. Cooked meat, warm and rich, far better than the half-rotted scraps she was used to scavenging. Her stomach twisted, torn between pride and hunger. She hated this, hated the helplessness of it all. But she had a son to protect. She took the plate. Garrick didn't say anything. He just sat back down, resting against the wall, watching the fire as if he wasn't waiting for her to eat. She studied him for a long moment, then, reluctantly, lifted a piece of meat to her mouth. The first bite was overwhelming. Warm, savory. Her body betrayed her, reacting instantly to the nourishment. She forced herself to eat slowly. Garrick glanced at her once, then turned his attention back to the flames. He wasn't leaving. Elvani didn't know what to make of that. No one had ever stayed before. And yet, here was a human offering her food, shelter, safety, expecting nothing in return. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but something close. The wind screamed against the shelter walls, rattling the metal plates like a beast clawing to get inside. The air smelled of iron and scorched dust, thick with the remnants of the earlier battle. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the sky in a sea of black clouds. And with it came the cold, sharp, biting, merciless. Elvani sat against the wall, wrapped in a heavy fabric Garrick had given her, though it barely dulled the ache in her muscles. Her wounds throbbed beneath the layers of fresh bandages, the deep claw marks on her arms and legs pulling tight whenever she moved. She had tried to ignore them, to push past the pain as she always did, but her body had reached its limit. The last few days had drained her completely, and yet she refused to sleep. Her golden eyes flicked to the fire, then to the man sitting across from her. Garrett Creed, a human warrior, a deserter, a man who fought like a predator, yet had the patience of a guardian. He was seated near the entrance, his rifle within easy reach, absently adjusting a strap on his armor. His movements were precise, controlled, always ready. Elvani didn't trust him. She wasn't sure she ever would. But for now, in this fragile moment, there was an uneasy truce between them. He had saved her life. He had fed her child. And now, he had given them shelter from the storm. That did not mean she owed him. Across the small space, her son stirred, curling deeper into the blankets that Garrick had placed around him. Elian, he was so small, too small to have endured all he had. His tiny hands clutched at the fabric, his violet skin glowing faintly in the dim firelight. His breathing was steady, but even in sleep, his brow creased slightly, a habit formed from too much fear, too many nights spent listening for danger. Her heart clenched. She had tried so hard to keep the weight of this cruel world from resting on his shoulders, but it was impossible. He had never known safety, never known the softness of a home. She had given him everything she could, but it was never enough. And yet, tonight, for the first time in a long time, he was warm. Elvani exhaled slowly, forcing herself to ease the tension in her shoulders. It would do no good to dwell on regrets. The storm outside roared louder, and Elian whimpered in his sleep, curling into a tighter ball. Elvani moved on instinct, reaching out to stroke his dark hair. "Show my little star," she whispered, her voice softer than she knew it could be. He mumbled something incoherent, shifting closer to her. Then, after a pause, his small voice broke the silence. "Will the bad ones come back?" Garrick glanced up from where he had been tending to his gear. He didn't speak, just watched. Elvani's fingers trailed down her son's back, slow and reassuring. "No, Tavari." The endearment slipped out before she could stop it. "The bad ones are gone." Elian lifted his head slightly, his golden eyes still heavy with sleep. Because of him, Elvani's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't want to admit it, but she had never lied to her son. "Yes," she murmured. Elian turned his head toward Garrick, blinking sleepily. "You fight good." Garrick let out a quiet breath, something like amusement flickering across his face. "Thanks, kid." Elian yawned, rubbing his eyes with his small fists. "You're big. Bigger than Mama." Elvani sighed. "Everyone is bigger than me." Garrick smirked at that, but said nothing. Elian studied him for a moment longer, then mumbled, "Are you going to stay?" Elvani's entire body went rigid. She had not let herself ask that question, had not dared to wonder. But now, her son had voiced it for her. Garrick leaned back against the wall, arms crossing over his chest. His expression didn't change, but there was something thoughtful in his eyes. "For now," he said. It was not a promise, but it was not a dismissal either. Elian seemed satisfied with that. He gave a sleepy nod, then nestled back into his blankets, his small fingers still curled around the edge of her sleeve. Within moments, his breathing evened out once more. Elvani let out a slow breath, her gaze shifting back to Garrick. He was watching her now, not with suspicion, but with something unreadable in his expression. She wasn't sure she liked it. "You should rest too," he said simply. She scoffed. "I do not rest when there is a storm outside." His brow arched slightly. "And what are you planning to do?" "Fight the wind." She bristled. "I do not need." She stopped when he moved. Not quickly, not threateningly, but with quiet certainty. Garrick grabbed something from his pack and tossed it toward her. She caught out of reflex, frowning as she unwrapped the fabric. Bandages. Clean ones. A small vial of antiseptic. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. You're bleeding through the old ones," he said, nodding toward her arm. She glanced down. He was right. The deep claw marks from the creatures that had attacked her had seeped through the makeshift wrappings. She hadn't even noticed. Elvani swallowed hard, her pride warring with logic. She didn't want his help, but she also didn't want an infection that could slow her down, or worse. She carefully unwound the old bandages, biting back a wince as the movement pulled at her wounds. Across from her, Garrick shifted. "I can. I will do it myself." Her voice was sharper than she intended. He didn't argue. He simply leaned back, letting her work. The antiseptic burned, but she didn't so much as flinch. Her hands were steady, movements practiced. She had done this before, many times. Still, she could feel him watching. "Where did you learn that?" he asked after a moment. She paused, glancing up. "Learn what? How to patch yourself up like that?" Elvani hesitated. She could lie. Tell him it was just something she had picked up in the wasteland. but something about the way he looked at her made her think he would see right through it. My people had healers, she said finally. I was not one of them, but I learned. Garrick nodded, as if he understood more than she had actually said. She finished wrapping the bandage around her arm, tying it off tightly. Then, without thinking, she reached toward Elian, checking his small hands for cuts, his face for any signs of discomfort. He did not wake, but he sighed softly, pressing his cheek against her palm. Something in her chest ached. She turned her gaze back to Garrick. Why do you stay? The question had been building inside her since the moment he had saved them. He exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. Because I said I would. That is not an answer. He smirked faintly. It's the only one I've got. Elvani narrowed her eyes. You are a strange man, Garrick Creed. I've heard worse. Silence stretched between them again. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. She did not trust him. Not yet. But as she adjusted the blanket around her son and leaned back against the wall, she realized something unsettling. She wanted to. Morning came in slow, pale streaks of light, filtering through the narrow cracks in the shelter's reinforced walls. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of damp metal and scorched earth. Outside, the wasteland stretched into the distance, its jagged rock formations and endless dunes bathed in a muted, grayish glow. Elvani stirred, her senses waking before her eyes did. She was warm, warmer than she had been in years. The blankets around her held the lingering heat of the fire, and for a brief moment, she let herself remain still, feeling the quiet hum of safety that was so foreign to her. Then reality settled in, and her golden eyes snapped open. Across the small space, Garrick sat with his back to her, meticulously cleaning his rifle. His movements were slow, practiced, deliberate, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. A soldier's habit. Elian was still asleep, curled into the folds of the blanket, his small hands resting near his face. His breathing was even peaceful. Elvani exhaled, forcing herself to relax. It was still strange, this sensation of not being alone. The past few days had changed everything, but she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. She shifted, testing her wounds. The bandages were secure, but the deeper cuts still ached. They would take time to heal. Garrick didn't look up as he spoke. You move quieter when you're awake. Elvani tensed. I was trained to. That made him glance at her. Trained? She hesitated. She hadn't meant to say that. Garrick tilted his head slightly, studying her in that unreadable way of his. He didn't press the question, but she could feel it hanging in the air between them. Instead of answering, she pushed herself upright and shifted toward Elian, brushing her fingers gently over his forehead. The boy sighed softly but didn't wake. He slept through the night, Garrick observed. Elvani nodded. For the first time in a long time. Something flickered in his expression, but he didn't comment. A sharp growl echoed from her stomach. Elvani stiffened, mortified. Garrick raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pack and tossed her something wrapped in cloth. She caught on instinct, frowning as she unwrapped it. Inside was a small, dense portion of dried meat and something resembling bread. She hesitated. Garrick watched her expectantly. You need to eat. She bristled. I am fine. You're not. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. You were half dead 2 days ago. You won't be any good to your kid if you collapse again. Elvani's fingers tightened around the cloth. I do not need you to. Elian stirred then, stretching with a soft, drowsy murmur. His golden eyes fluttered open, still hazy with sleep, and he blinked at them both. Then he yawned. I'm hungry, he mumbled. Garrick smirked. At least one of you admits it. Elvani sighed, defeated, and handed Elian a piece of the food before reluctantly taking a bite herself. The moment it hit her tongue, her body betrayed her. The warmth, the salt, the simple act of nourishment. It was overwhelming. She ate slowly, forcing herself to stay composed. Garrick didn't gloat, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her as if memorizing the way she finally accepted something from him without a fight. Elian, oblivious to the silent tension between them, chewed happily, kicking his feet beneath the blanket. Are we staying here forever? Elvani's grip on the food tightened slightly. Garrick answered before she could. No. Elian frowned. Why not? This place isn't safe long-term, Garrick said simply. We need supplies. A better shelter. Somewhere with an actual defensible position. Elian tilted his head. Like a fortress? Garrick chuckled. Something like that. Elian considered this, then nodded. Okay. Elvani stared at him. You agree just like that? Elian shrugged. He's big. He fights good. And he gave me food. Elvani exhaled through her nose. That is a very low standard for trust. Garrick grinned. I'll take what I can get. She shot him a glare, but didn't argue. Elian, still munching on his meal, suddenly brightened. I can help. I'm strong. He held up his small fist for emphasis. I can carry things. Garrick nodded solemnly. That's important. And I can run really fast, Elian added, looking proud. Faster than Mama. Elvani crossed her arms. That is a lie. Elian giggled, the sound light and unburdened. For a moment, Elvani just watched him, her heart caught between joy and sorrow. He was so small, so fragile, yet somehow he had survived everything this world had thrown at him. And now, for the first time, he was laughing. She swallowed hard and turned her attention back to Garrick. Where do you intend to go? There's an old outpost about a day's walk from here, Garrick said. Could have supplies, weapons, maybe even a working terminal. Elvani frowned. And if it's occupied? He shrugged. Then we improvise. She didn't like that answer, but she had no better options. Elian beamed. Adventure. Elvani shook her head. This is not a game, Elian. He grinned up at her. I know. Garrick stood, rolling his shoulders. We leave at first light. Elvani hesitated. This was the moment she should have said no. The moment she should have taken her son and disappeared into the wasteland, the way she had always done. But she didn't. She sat there, staring at the man who had saved them, at the firelight dancing across his sharp green eyes, at the ease with which Elian had already accepted him. And for the first time in years, she didn't want to leave. She exhaled slowly, as if coming to terms with something she didn't fully understand yet. Fine. Garrick nodded, as if he had expected that answer all along. Elian clapped his hands together. Does this mean we're a team? Elvani groaned. We are not a... Yes, Garrick cut in smoothly. Elvani shot him a sharp look, but he only smirked. Elian beamed, clearly satisfied, and curled back into his blankets. Good. I like our team. Elvani let out a long, exhausted breath. Garrick met her gaze across the fire, his expression unreadable. She didn't trust him. Not completely. Not yet. But something had shifted between them. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't feel alone. The wasteland stretched before them, an endless sea of scorched earth and jagged rock formations. The sky was a dull, washed-out gray, the air heavy with the scent of dust and distant storms. Every step kicked up fine grains of sand that clung to their clothes, working their way into the seams of armor and fabric. Elvani adjusted the grip on her knife, scanning the horizon as they walked. The outpost Garrick had spoken of lay somewhere beyond the next ridge, but the journey there was uneasy. The silence felt unnatural, the stillness pressing in on her instincts like a warning she couldn't ignore. She wasn't alone in her unease. Garrick walked ahead, rifle slung across his chest, his sharp green eyes flicking between the rocks and the open expanse around them. He had that look again, that quiet stillness just before a storm. He was expecting trouble. Elian, however, seemed oblivious to the tension. His small boots kicked at loose stones as he walked, his voice breaking the silence. Are there going to be robots at the outpost? Doubt it, Garrick said, his tone distracted but not unkind. Too old. Too broken. Elian hummed thoughtfully. What about treasure? Possibly. The boy brightened. I want a sword. Elvani sighed. You are not getting a sword. Elian pouted. But Garrick has a sword. Garrick smirked but kept his eyes on the terrain. Can't argue with that logic. Elvani shot him a sharp look. Do not encourage him. Garrick only shrugged. A man should know how to handle a blade. He is not a man, Elvani said flatly. He is a child. Elian crossed his arms. I'm a warrior. Elvani let out a slow breath. No, you are. The gunshot cracked through the air. Instinct took over. Elvani grabbed Elian and shoved him behind the nearest rock, just as a second shot rang out, kicking up dust where they had been standing. Sniper. Garrick was already moving, rolling behind a rusted-out husk of a transport vehicle. His rifle was in his hands before the echoes of the shot had faded. Stay down, he barked. Elvani pressed Elian against the dirt, shielding him with her body. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. This was not the first time she had been hunted. Garrick peered around the side of the wreckage, scanning the rocky ridge ahead. 2 shooters. 1 rifle, 1 scattergun. Elvani tightened her grip on her knife. Raiders. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the rocks. Not bad, off-worlder. Garrick let out a slow breath. Yeah, raiders. Elvani's stomach tightened. Raiders. They were worse than wild beasts. They didn't kill for survival. They killed because they enjoyed it. They hunted the weak, took whatever they wanted, and left nothing but ruin in their wake. Some were remnants of fallen war bands, others exiles from broken colonies. Many were former soldiers turned mercenaries after the war had ended and left them with nowhere to go. And now they had found them. They were pinned. The raiders had the high ground, better vantage points, more cover. Garrick could take out 1, maybe 2, but not before the others moved in. Elvani turned to Elian. His golden eyes were wide but alert. He was afraid, but he was listening. Elian, she whispered, keeping her voice calm. You see that gap between the rocks? She pointed to a narrow opening in the ridge ahead. When I tell you, you run. Fast and low. His small hands clutched her arm. But I will be right behind you. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. She turned to Garrick. Cover us. He frowned. That's a bad idea. Elvani gave him a hard look. Do it anyway. Garrick muttered something under his breath, but shifted position, gripping his rifle tighter. On my mark. Another shot rang out, chipping the rock beside them. Garrick fired back, making one of the raiders curse and duck for cover. Move! Elvani pushed Elian forward. He ran, small legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. Elvani followed close behind, her muscles burning as they sprinted for cover. A shot fired. Pain seared through her shoulder. She staggered, nearly falling, but forced herself forward. She had survived worse. Garrick's rifle roared. A scream echoed from the ridge. She didn't stop. She grabbed Elian and dove behind an abandoned transport, just as another bullet slammed into the dirt where they had been. Her breath came hard and fast. She pressed a hand to her shoulder, feeling the warmth of blood spreading. The wound wasn't deep. She could still move. Garrick's voice cut through the comms. They're circling around. Elvani swore under her breath. They were being flanked. She turned to Elian. Stay here. No matter what happens, do not move. His lower lip trembled, but he nodded. Okay. She pushed herself up. Let's end this. Garrick smirked. Finally, the raiders came fast. The first dropped down from the rocks, swinging a rusted blade toward Elvani. She dodged low, slicing her knife across his thigh. He howled, stumbling, and she drove her blade into his gut, twisting deep. The second lunged for Garrick. He sidestepped, grabbing the raider's wrist and snapping it with brutal efficiency before shoving him to the ground and putting a bullet through his skull. The third hesitated. That was his mistake. Garrick shot him clean through the chest. And just like that, it was over. The air was thick with the scent of blood and dust. The bodies lay still, their weapons scattered in the dirt. Elvani exhaled, her pulse still pounding. Garrick rolled his shoulder. Well, that could have gone worse. Elian peeked out from behind the transport. Did we win? Garrick huffed a laugh. Yeah, kid, we won. Elvani sighed, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. Barely. Garrick walked over and crouched beside her. Let me see. She scowled. I am fine. You always say that. He pulled a bandage from his pack. Sit still. She glared at him, but didn't resist as he carefully wrapped her wound. His hands were firm but gentle, his touch sure and steady. Elian watched them, eyes wide. Then suddenly he grinned. We are a team, he said. Elvani groaned. Do not. Yeah. Garrick cut in smoothly. We are. Elvani shot him a murderous look, but he only smirked. Elian beamed, clearly pleased. Elvani sighed, her head falling back against the rock. This man was going to be the death of her. And the worst part? She didn't hate it. The outpost loomed ahead, a skeletal ruin of metal and stone, half swallowed by the wasteland. It stood against the horizon like a forgotten monument, its rusted walls streaked with age, its towers crumbling but still standing. Time had worn it down, but it had not yet fallen. Elvani adjusted her grip on her knife as they approached. Every instinct told her to be wary. Places like this had ghosts. Garrick walked ahead, his rifle raised but relaxed, eyes sweeping across the ruins with the practiced ease of someone who had walked into too many dead cities before. His expression was unreadable, but Elvani had learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture. He was alert, ready for trouble. Elian, tucked safely between them, barely contained his excitement. "This is so cool," he whispered. His golden eyes darted from the towering structures to the shadows lurking between them. "Do you think there's treasure inside?" Garrick smirked. "Only one way to find out." Elvani rolled her eyes. "We are here for supplies, not adventure." Elian huffed. "Supplies can be treasure." Garrick gave her a sideways glance. "Kid's not wrong." Elvani muttered something under her breath and stepped forward. "Let's just get this over with." They slipped through a broken archway, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the distant scent of rust and decay. This place had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. But it was not empty. The first sign was the faint drag marks on the floor, the kind left by something heavy being moved. Then the scattered shell casings, old but not ancient. Elvani exchanged a glance with Garrick. Someone had been here recently. She pulled Elian closer. "Stay near me." His small fingers curled around hers, his excitement now laced with hesitation. They moved deeper inside. A shattered console flickered dimly in the darkness, its screen cracked but still trying to function. Garrick crouched beside it, brushing away the dust. The faint blue glow reflected in his eyes as he tapped at the controls. Elvani stood behind him, scanning the shadows. "Anything useful?" "Power's mostly dead," Garrick muttered. But he frowned, fingers moving over the screen. "Looks like someone tried to reboot the system." "Recently?" Elvani's pulse quickened. "Define recently." "Days. Maybe a week." She straightened, tension tightening her spine. "Then we are not alone." Garrick's jaw clenched slightly. "No, we're not." A faint sound echoed through the hall, a metallic clatter, distant but distinct. They were being watched. Garrick moved first, rising silently to his feet. He motioned for Elian to stay behind cover. The boy obeyed, slipping behind a rusted crate, eyes wide but silent. "Smart. Good." Elvani followed Garrick's lead, stepping carefully into the shadows. Another noise, closer this time. Then movement. A figure emerged from the corridor ahead. Tall, armed, not a raider. His armor was battered but reinforced, the kind worn by men who had once fought in organized wars before the world turned feral. His rifle was slung across his chest, his stance cautious but unafraid. His eyes locked onto Garrick's. Recognition flickered between them. Elvani felt it before Garrick spoke. "Creed." The stranger's voice was rough, edged with something unreadable. Garrick's grip on his rifle tightened. Elvani's pulse pounded. "Who is he?" The man took another step forward. His gaze flickered to her, then to Elian, then back to Garrick. "You should have stayed dead." Silence. Then, Garrick exhaled through his nose. "Yeah," he muttered. "I get that a lot." The man shifted, his fingers brushing over his weapon, but he didn't raise it. "You're in the wrong place." Garrick smirked. "I tend to be." Elvani's patience snapped. "Enough," she hissed, stepping forward. "Who are you?" The man's gaze settled on her. He studied her for a moment, then exhaled. Someone who knew him before he decided to disappear. Elvani turned to Garrick. "You recognize him?" Garrick's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah." The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I used to fight beside him, back when he had a cause." Garrick didn't react, but Elvani felt the tension ripple through him. "I don't do that anymore." Garrick said. The man tilted his head. Yeah? So what do you do now? His gaze flicked to Elian, then to Elvani. Playhouse. Elvani's fingers itched for her knife. Garrick's smirk didn't reach his eyes. Something like that. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, the man exhaled. You should leave. Garrick's voice was quiet. We just need supplies. The man studied him, then glanced at Elvani again. His expression shifted slightly. Less hostility, more curiosity. You got soft. Garrick shrugged. Maybe. The man's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer. Then he sighed and slung his rifle over his shoulder. There's a storage room down the hall, he muttered. Take what you need and go. Elvani hesitated. And you? The man smirked faintly. I'm not the one being hunted. Elvani frowned, but didn't press further. Garrick nodded once. Thanks. The man didn't reply. As they moved past him, Elvani felt the weight of the stranger's gaze on her back. He wasn't just watching Garrick. He was watching her, and she didn't like it. They reached the storage room in silence. The shelves were half looted, but there were medical supplies, rations, and, mercifully, ammo. Elvani grabbed what she could, her mind still turning. Garrick had a past, a dangerous one, and it wasn't done with him yet. Elian, oblivious to the tension, held up a small, rusted object. Look, treasure. Garrick chuckled, ruffling his hair. Nice find, kid. Elvani sighed. Can we go now? Garrick looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. They left the outpost behind, stepping back into the wasteland. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the barren ground. The wasteland stretched endlessly around them, silent and empty beneath a sky littered with stars. Elvani sat with her knees pulled up, staring into the dying flames. The warmth barely touched her skin, but she didn't move closer. She had spent years in this place, fought for every scrap, killed when she had to, run when she couldn't fight. Survival had become second nature. And yet, for the first time, she wasn't thinking about surviving. She was thinking about leaving. Across from her, Garrick sat with his rifle resting against his leg, arms draped over his knees. He was watching her, not impatiently, not pressuring her, just waiting. Finally, his voice broke the quiet. Say it. Elvani didn't look at him. Say what? That you want to leave? She exhaled, tilting her head up, golden eyes flicking toward the stars above them. It is not that simple. Garrick didn't argue. He just nodded, like he expected that answer. But he wasn't going to let her sit with it. There's a ship, he said. That caught her attention. Her gaze snapped back to him. What? An old freighter. I saw the records at the outpost. Hidden in a derelict spaceport a few miles from here, Garrick explained. If it still works, we could be off this rock by morning. Elvani's grip on her knife tightened. Escape. A way out. She had spent so long surviving here. She had stopped imagining there could be anything beyond it. Could it really be that simple? She glanced at Elian. He was curled up beside her, fast asleep, one small hand clutching the fabric of her sleeve. His violet skin was warm in the firelight, his breathing soft and steady. He had never known anything but this world, the dust, the hunger, the constant moving. Was this really the future she wanted for him? More than anyone, he deserved something better. Her throat felt tight. She swallowed hard. We do not know if the ship is functional. Garrick smirked. Guess we'll find out. Elvani exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You are reckless. You say that like it's a bad thing, Garrick said, stretching out lazily. Look, I get it. Change is hard. But staying here? What's left for you? Elvani didn't answer right away. What was left for her here? A life of running? A life of waiting for the next fight, the next enemy, the next battle she might not walk away from? She had spent years clawing for scraps in the dirt, believing that was all there was. But now there was a choice. She looked back at Garrick. He wasn't pushing her, but his gaze was steady, unshaken. He wasn't just offering a ship. He was offering something more. A future, a home. Maybe not a safe one, maybe not an easy one, but one they could build together. Elvani let out a slow breath, glancing down at Elian once more. Then, so quietly it was almost lost in the wind, she said, We leave at sunrise. Garrick's smirk softened into something real. Good choice. And for the first time in her life, Elvani didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was running towards something. The sky had begun to shift, the deep blue of night giving way to the soft glow of dawn. The air was cool, crisp, carrying the scent of dust and metal as they moved through the wasteland. Elvani walked in silence, her golden eyes scanning the horizon, every muscle in her body alert despite the exhaustion weighing her down. Beside her, Garrick walked with that same effortless ease, like a man who had seen too much but never let it slow him down. His rifle was slung across his back, his pace steady, unhurried. Ahead of them, just beyond the jagged rock formations, the spaceport emerged from the earth like the bones of a long-dead beast. It was massive. Once it must have been a gateway to the stars, a place where ships came and went, carrying people to lives far beyond this desolate world. Now, it was nothing but a graveyard. The metal framework was rusted and broken in places. Entire sections collapsed beneath the weight of time. The landing pads were cracked, littered with the remains of old ships that had never flown again. But one ship still stood. Elvani stopped, her breath catching. It was old, worn down by the years, half buried in dust, but intact. A freighter, large enough to hold supplies, strong enough to survive another journey. A way out. Elian's small fingers tightened around hers. Is it really going to fly? Elvani looked at Garrick. He was already stepping forward, his hands running over the ship's hull like a man testing the strength of a blade. Only one way to find out, he murmured. He found a control panel near the entrance, wiped away the thick layer of dirt, and pressed a sequence of buttons. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, shuddering rumble vibrated through the ground beneath them. The ship came to life. Lights flickered. Engines whirred. Dust billowed outward as long silent systems powered on, the hum of machinery filling the air. Elian gasped. It's waking up. Elvani exhaled. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. Garrick grinned, slapping the side of the ship like an old friend. Told you. Still got some fight left in her. Elvani shook her head. You did not tell me anything. You guessed. Garrick smirked. Same thing. She let out a breath, running a hand over her face. This was happening. For years, she had fought to stay alive on this cursed world. Now, for the first time, she was leaving it behind. But could she really do this? She turned, looking back at the wasteland, at the jagged rocks, the endless sky, the ruins of a world that had shaped her, hardened her, nearly broken her. She had spent so long believing there was nothing else, that this was her fate. Now, all she had to do was step forward. Elian tugged at her hand. Mama. She looked down at him. His golden eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. She inhaled deeply. Then, without looking back again, she followed Garrick up the ramp. The doors sealed shut behind them. The past stayed behind. The ship trembled as it rose, engines roaring against the silence of the dying world below. Dust and debris swirled beneath them, the wasteland shrinking with every second, swallowed by distance. Elvani gripped the edge of the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes locked onto the viewport. She had spent her entire life on that world, bleeding into its dust, surviving its cruelty, refusing to break beneath its weight. And now, she was leaving it behind. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest not quite settling. Beside her, Garrick was steady at the controls, his fingers dancing over switches and levers with a confidence that should have been impossible. The ship wasn't smooth, it rattled, protested, but it was flying. They were flying. Behind them, Elian let out a breathless laugh, pressing his hands to the viewport, wide-eyed, full of wonder. I can see everything, he gasped. Elvani turned, watching the glow of the stars reflect in his golden irises. The vastness of space stretched before them, endless and open. A future he had never even dared to dream of. He was finally free. She was finally free. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It should have felt like relief. But something inside her still burned. She glanced at Garrick. He had been quiet since takeoff, focused on stabilizing their ascent. The usual smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable. It was strange. She had never seen him so still. The man who had once felt like an unwelcome presence, an intruder in her carefully guarded world, was now sitting beside her like he had always belonged there. And maybe, in some unspoken, infuriating way, he did. The thought unsettled her. For years, she had built walls. Thick, unbreakable, meant to keep out anyone who could betray, abandon, or disappoint her. Yet here was this reckless, stubborn human who had stayed, who had fought beside her, who had kept her son safe, who had offered her something she hadn't dared to want. She turned away, staring back at the stars. Leaving the planet was supposed to be the hard part. So why did this feel harder? She felt Garrick's gaze on her, quiet but heavy. "You all right?" Elvani hesitated. It was a simple question. She could answer the way she always did. Dismiss it. Shrug it off. Pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. So instead of pushing it down, instead of running, she did something else. She turned toward him, and she kissed him. It was not hesitant. It was not careful, not calculated. It was a choice, made without fear. She felt Garrick stiffen, surprised, but only for a moment. Then his hands slid to her waist, grounding her, pulling her in like he had been waiting for this. And maybe he had. The ship hummed beneath them, the stars burned bright, and for the first time in her life, Elvani wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about him. When she finally pulled back, Garrick didn't say anything at first. He just stared at her, like he was memorizing the moment. Then, slowly, inevitably, he smirked. "Well," he murmured, voice rough. "That was unexpected." Elvani rolled her eyes, though she could still feel the heat on her lips. "Do not get used to it." Garrick chuckled, leaning back in his seat, but his expression was softer now. Something unreadable in his eyes. Something real. Too late. Behind them, Elian, who had been completely silent during the whole exchange, suddenly groaned loudly. "Ew." Elvani closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. "Hush, Tavari." Elian flailed his arms dramatically. "I liked it better when you were grumpy." Garrick shot him a grin. "Trust me, kid, she's still grumpy." Elvani punched Garrick in the arm. Garrick laughed. Elian sighed, shaking his head like he was far too mature to deal with them. "I don't know how I'm supposed to live like this." Garrick ruffled his hair. "Welcome to family life, kid." Elian groaned. "This is the worst." Elvani smirked, shaking her head, but she didn't argue. For the first time in years, her world was not just her and Elian. It was more, and as the ship soared into the stars, she let herself believe in something she had once thought impossible. A future. The days blurred together in the quiet hum of the ship, their lives shifting from survival to something else, something unfamiliar, something lighter. For the first time in years, they weren't running. There were no more battles, no more desperate fights for food, no more sleepless nights listening for the sound of raiders in the dark. There was only this, the hum of the ship, the warmth of the artificial lights overhead, the scent of something vaguely edible cooking in the galley, and laughter, Elian's laughter. Elvani leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as Garrick and Elian wrestled in the common area. The ship's artificial gravity made their movements exaggerated. Elian bounced as he lunged at Garrick, attempting to tackle him, only for Garrick to twist and grab him midair, throwing him over his shoulder in one smooth motion. "Yield!" Elian shrieked, twisting wildly in Garrick's grip. "You're losing, human." Garrick groaned in mock defeat, flopping onto his back. "Ugh, he's too strong. Someone save me." Elian cackled in triumph, scrambling onto Garrick's chest and planting both feet against his ribs. "I am the champion of the stars." Elvani smirked. "You let him win." Garrick peeked at her from where he lay sprawled on the floor, grinning. "Did I?" Elian immediately pointed at him, eyes narrowing. "He did. Mama, he let me win." Elvani huffed, feigning disappointment. "Then it is not a real victory." Elian gasped, utterly scandalized. "It was real." She arched a brow. "Then do it again." Elian turned to Garrick, determined. "Fight me for real." Garrick chuckled, sitting up. "Oh no, I know a trap when I see one." Elian crossed his arms. "Coward." Garrick gasped dramatically, placing a hand over his heart. Disrespect. Mutiny. This is what I get for being a good father figure. Elian froze. The room fell quiet. Garrick blinked, as if realizing what he had just said. Elvani saw the way Elian's golden eyes widened, how the words settled into him like something heavy and fragile all at once. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Elian smiled, a small, shy smile at first, uncertain, as if he was afraid to believe it. Then brighter, softer. Garrick hesitated, watching him. Elian lunged forward, not to attack, not to wrestle, but to wrap his small arms tightly around Garrick's middle, burying his face against his chest. You're not bad at it, he mumbled. Garrick stilled for a fraction of a second. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around Elian, holding him close. Something tightened in Elvani's chest. It had been so long since Elian had let himself be a child, since he had felt safe enough to believe in something beyond survival. Garrick rested his chin atop Elian's head. His voice was quieter when he spoke. Yeah, kid, I'll take that. Elvani exhaled, her fingers curling at her sides. It was strange how something so simple, so ordinary, could feel so profound. The three of them had fought beside each other, bled for each other, protected each other through fire and ruin. And yet this moment, this quiet, fleeting second of warmth, felt like the most important of all. She wasn't sure when she had stepped forward. She only realized it when Garrick lifted his head, his green eyes meeting hers. For once, he wasn't smirking, wasn't teasing, wasn't throwing out some ridiculous joke. He just looked at her, soft, open, waiting, and Elvani moved without thinking. She knelt beside them, her hands brushing over Elian's hair, her touch light but steady. He was warm, safe, whole. Garrick shifted slightly, just enough for their shoulders to touch. He was warm, too. She inhaled slowly, and then, before she could overthink it, before she could convince herself not to, she kissed him. It was slow this time, soft, deliberate. She could feel his surprise, just for a moment, before he melted into it. Before he kissed her back, there was no urgency, no battle behind them, no fear of losing each other. Only this. Only her and Garrick and the slow, unshakable certainty that, finally, she was exactly where she was meant to be. She pulled back, lips barely brushing his. Garrick blinked at her. Then, slowly, that signature smirk returned. Well, he murmured, voice rough. Looks like I really did win something today. Elvani rolled her eyes, even as her lips curved upward despite herself. Do not ruin it, she warned. He grinned. No promises. Elian groaned dramatically. Ugh, you're doing it again. Elvani smirked. Hush, Tavari. Elian pouted. I liked it better when you just argued all the time. Garrick ruffled his hair. Trust me, kid. She's still mean. Elvani narrowed her eyes. You were very close to getting thrown into the airlock. Garrick chuckled. And yet, you kissed me anyway. Elvani huffed, but she didn't deny it. Elian sighed heavily, but there was laughter in his voice. He didn't know what came next. None of them did. But for the first time in a long, long time, Elvani wasn't afraid of the future. She turned her gaze toward the viewport, watching the stars stretch endlessly before them. A new world awaited them. A new life awaited them. And this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone.